I just want to start by thanking everyone for taking time out of this snow day today. I'm sure the number of children that have decided to spend this hour of their day with us is great. But we're happy to have everyone here today virtually with us and look forward to being able to do things like this in person again soon. Today is another event in the Miller-Johnson Action for Change series. Last year, when we experienced the significant social events throughout our nation and in Grand Rapids, the firm came together and really had a deep discussion about what we could do to make a difference. We felt like we were certainly all contributing, our own personal resources and the firm's resources, both financially and as people, to making a difference in our community. But it was clear to us that there needed to be a more focused effort, and so we put together a team that put together an Actions for Change contract and to try to hold ourselves to making a difference. And that has taken a number of forms over the course of the last year. Initially, we put together a Conversations for Change series where members of our team have volunteered to record videos explaining their own personal experiences and helping us understand that these aren't just issues that we see on the news. These are issues that are pervasive in our lives, in our friends' lives. And it's important to not just educate us, but allow these stories to be known and to be heard. And so those are all available on our website. We continue to populate that as others, both inside and outside the firm, want to share their stories and experiences. And I will tell you that everyone that's done them, we are so appreciative of and have learned so much that it's worth taking the time to do. We've also engaged in something called Project Give Back, where we've put together a team that is intending to tackle and provide resources to underrepresented members of our community. Specifically, they're going to be focused on 3 areas to start. First, providing free legal services to historically underrepresented businesses, in coordinating with various local groups in doing that. Also providing legal support to victims of human trafficking in connection with the YMCA. And then finally, in terms of in providing support in expunging records of people with drug convictions. And so it's an effort to actually try to implement positive change in our community. And in addition, today is just another step in what's a never-ending process in this effort, and that is to kind of continue broader conversations amongst our community regarding these issues. And so today, our primary focus is going to be on diversity in the workplace, given the participants and the audience requests. But I think before we get to the point of being able to focus on workplace diversity, I think we have to understand what needs to happen in order to have a diverse talent pool to begin with. And really, from our perspective, that requires examination of both diversity within our government and diversity within our community. And so I'd like to first start by introducing our panelists for today's discussion. First, we have Representative Sarah Anthony. who's a member of the Michigan 68th House District State Representative. I've promised not to go through her lengthy and impressive bio, but she is a Central Michigan Chippewa, and she represents a district in the Lansing area, and we really appreciate her being here today. Also with us is Dr. Ashley Baker, who's a recent addition to the Michigan State University Athletic Department. She's the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. I won't comment on what the basketball team's record has been since she joined, but she's got some work to do in that area too. And then finally, we have Reverend Joe Jones, the president and CEO of the Hekima Group, a DE&I consulting service, and also one of the city commissioners here in Grand Rapids. So first, thank you all for being here today. And then I guess Representative Anthony, starting at the government level, obviously you have been able to work, with the current majority to accomplish what you can, but talk a little bit about what else is out there and what you're not able to accomplish, and what you're being held back on, in terms of making Michigan a more inclusive state.
Yeah, thank you. And just, it's hard, right? I will say 2020 in my years on earth, there's never been a year like that, right? Just the trauma that many folks faced, and I have to say particularly African Americans in the state and nation, fighting both a global pandemic that disproportionately impacted Black and brown folks, and then just the social unrest that we saw. A lot of those fights and debates found their ways to the Capitol building, which is in my legislative district, the halls of power. And every job I've ever had, county commission, working in the college access field, I always approach things from an equity lens. But often it is frustrating knowing that we are facing, when we talk about systemic racism, it is in every single system. It is in the water we drink and the air we breathe. It is in literally every single issue that we tackle in the state Capitol building. And so the first battle is to actually make the case that systemic racism is embedded in everything. We can't talk about tax policy. We can't talk about environmental policy. We can't talk about the education system without calling the thing, and making sure that individuals know that these systems are inherently unjust, and not absolving ourselves from the fact that while we were not in the halls of power when the decisions were made, we have inherited systems that are just not fair and equitable. Although we are living in these times of 2021, the decisions that were made in those same rooms in the Capitol impacts my health outcomes, impacts my future children's ability to have a quality education. And so it is often frustrating, sometimes being the lone voice in a room, trying to make the case, trying to convince folks that although you may not be able to see it and feel it and taste it, it is there. And sometimes we've seen, us progress in certain areas. Criminal justice reform is one of those areas that we've been able to all get folks in a room and try to kind of nip at the edges of that issue, of the multiple issues related to criminal justice reform. But we have yet to have the courage to tackle the big stuff, right? Again, and a part of that is the lack of acknowledgement that there were individuals who sat in the halls of power and drew lines to say where Black folks could or couldn't live, that folks decided who could and couldn't be at the table. And we have yet to really have that reckoning as politicians right now. That's not to say that there isn't energy in certain pockets and certain pieces and certain sectors, but the lack of understanding and empathy and then courage to sometimes buck up against our political parties, sometimes be the only voice in very gerrymandered districts to unapologetically speak out about ways that we can dismantle this system, it is very challenging. And I think that in many ways, the lack of courage will continue to have a stronghold on us if we don't do things inherently different. I think we got really close in 2020. We started to have those difficult conversations. I admire the work that you all continue to do. I'll tell you, if you ask some of your Black and brown friends, we were overwhelmed with our white colleagues and neighbors calling us, asking us what our experiences has been in the last 20, 30, 40 years as Black folks in the country. And most of those calls stopped. And most of those courageous conversations ended. So the fact that you all are continuing the work, I think is really valuable. And I hope that in this new legislative term, we continue to have those courageous conversations.
So it's interesting that you comment, because, the Miller Johnson client base runs the gamut from people that are entirely woke to not. And I would assume that, this webinar has a similarly broad perspective on it. How do we, in the communities that we live in, especially Kent and Ottawa County outside of Grand Rapids, are reasonably conservative areas. How do we communicate this message effectively to those groups? I've thought a lot recently about, I think it was Dr. King's letters from the Birmingham jail, where he talks about the moderate whites being his greatest challenge going forward. And when you look at an area like West Michigan, you see, I think, the people that he was referring to when he said that. And so how do we make a difference and communicate effectively with those groups? Joe, do you have Reverend Jones, do you have any thoughts?
Thanks, Bob. And I want to begin by saying thanks to Miller Johnson, as has been said by Representative Anthony. Hats off to the firm's commitment to continue down the path of what I would say is being vulnerable and being open to having very difficult conversations and operating in the space of being uncomfortable. I think that is what's required, not just for organizations like yours, but just for a number of systems and structures throughout our yet to be United States of America. And so when we talk about this idea of, I think of today's difficulty of doing or what's being asked in many ways is the question that Rodney King asked many years ago, and that was, can we all get along? That's the feeling, I think, that is in our midst right now, and yet there's something to be said about being in a space where there's such a cross section of lived experiences, especially as it pertains to having conversations about race, about racism, about discrimination and inequity. And I think ultimately it comes down to, when we look at whether it's the clientele of Miller Johnson or just those who live in America, the thing that binds us together is humanity, right? This one. This recognition that we're all human. And I think that what is missing quite often is perhaps the best start that we can engage in is just recognizing the inherent value that we all have, right? And the critical importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Now, those are two fundamental concepts that have not been in play in our yet to be United States of America since its inception. This whole idea of treating an individual with dignity and respect, everybody, regardless of race, regardless of skin tone, regardless of socioeconomic status, you name it. But just think for a second, let it marinate, what that would do to our country if we adopted the mindset that we are going to begin to treat everyone with dignity and respect. How far that would go. Before we talk about race, before we talk about all of the things that separate us, right? Which again, there's significant things that separate us. But to just start with those two concepts of dignity and respect, because there's the belief, and I think that there's a lot to be said about the theory of, when you look at, what is it that causes us to, I guess, not get along, and what causes significant separation. It really starts with this whole idea of being disrespected, of not receiving the dignity that we feel as if we should receive. And what I would like to see is just a real commitment, not just from individuals, but from organizations, from corporations, who will make it as part of their mission statement that I am going to commit to looking at everyone and recognizing them, and doing so with dignity and respect, regardless of their political affiliation. It just doesn't matter, right? It matters, but if we can start there, I think that what happens is there then is an opportunity for, I think, real substantive dialogue, instead of now where everyone wants to let's just talk about it. Well, it's kind of hard to talk about something if you don't want to take the opportunity to recognize that which has occurred, and the things that have caused such damage, to make it really difficult to have what I would say are substantive conversations about really hard issues. If in many ways you're operating from a place of wanting to have a selective memory in terms of what has happened in the past. And so I'll stop there.
No, those are great. Those are great perspectives. And it's interesting to, as we kind of now transition into a workplace diversity discussion, it's interesting to me to kind of relate some of the things that we're going to be talking about now that employers are committed to, and for reasons that are as economic as they are the right thing to do. And how if we as a community, as a state or a country, we're able to place value on these things the same way that businesses do, how different the outcomes might be. Because when we look at, and let's move into this kind of, how do we define diversity within the workplace? I think we look at what diversity means to each of us individually and why it's important. And maybe a good starting point for launching into that, Dr. Baker, would be, how that plays into the education arena and especially athletics.
Yeah, no, so as the others, I want to echo my appreciation for being a part of this conversation. And as both of my colleagues here have been talking, if you see me looking down, I'm taking notes. I think part of this is about being lifelong learners and always being willing to educate ourselves on things that are new, things that we have not been exposed to historically. So when you think about that in an education space, particularly in a workspace, oftentimes there's an educational background that each of us come into our workspace with, whatever that may be. And it's oftentimes very diverse. Something Reverend Jones said when he talked about us acknowledging and recognizing the differences between us, a major part of this is about, once we recognize, acknowledge, and identify, we then place value on those differences, as opposed to identifying them and saying, well, they're just different and we'll figure it out. Well, no, what does that difference bring in terms of value to our organizations, to our community spaces, to our workplaces? And I often will use the word community when I'm talking about a workplace, because that's ultimately what it is. We operate and function. Specifically, when I think about working in the sports industry, I have historically spent more time with my colleagues and coworkers than sometimes I do with my own family. So it is a part of the community. My child is ingrained in that community, and we are all a part of this space. And each of those unique differences matter in how we contribute. So when you think about, this broad perspective of diversity, it's not just race, it's not just gender, not just politics. It's all of the various experiences that we've had that then we show up into our workspace or into our community, bringing with us and being our authentic selves and being able to say, this is who I am, this is what I bring. And, it's everything from where we're from geographically, what our family structures are. All of these different things contribute to who we are and contribute to what, I identify as diversity. So there's a numbers game to it. There's a piece of it that, yes, we can write it down on a piece of paper and quantify it. And that's fine. And sometimes that's necessary, particularly for how we look at how it impacts business results and workplace results. But it's the piece of being open to accepting and welcoming that difference, placing the value on it, and identifying how it contributes to our overall success. And I think in education, in the sports industry, no matter what industry you're in, that's a key component to it. So that's kind of when I think about what does diversity mean in these spaces, that's what we're looking at, different ways of thinking, different perspectives, so that when we're making decisions, we're creating policy, there is a variety of experiences represented that we can say, have we considered this? Who's not in the room? Whose voice is not a part of this conversation that should be? Because, when you think about from a political standpoint or education standpoint, whenever we're making decisions and implementing things, there is impact to what those decisions are. Who is being impacted and in what way? And have we done our part within our own space, within our decision-making group or whatever that may be, to think about what decision we make is going to impact not just us, but our community and the people around us.
I think that's I think your suggestion of the importance of engaging all of the stakeholders and understanding the impact that any decision can have on a large group of stakeholders is a great example of the ways that by going through some of these exercises, looking at diversity from a thought perspective, you can see how valuable it is to have a diversity of thought at the table in terms of your business outcomes. And so kind of taking that the next step further to talk about all the other types of diversity that we're examining really helps a business owner look at these challenges in a way that can be incrementally positive to their business. Representative Anthony, it brings me back to government of why isn't there why do we have such a difficult time taking a similar perspective there? And obviously one of the things we were talking about in preparing for this was kind of the independent redistricting commission and how that might impact what our government looks like compared to who it represents. And in your mind, if that had that impact, would it make it easier to have those discussions, or would the diversity because again, there's significant diversity of thought through both parties. And I think to your points earlier, the comfort of expressing that diversity when it's not the same as your party's thinking has become a challenge.
Well, talk about lifelong learning. So I'm even drawing from what Reverend Jones said earlier and Dr. Baker. I just thought about the fact that I probably have the most diverse work environment in the state. We have forced diversity, right? From every corner of our state, from the UP to the D, everything in between. We have people from all walks of life, professions, races, genders, thoughts, ideology. And I think sometimes because it's forced and there's no intentionality to actually go from diversity to inclusion, and making sure that voices are intentionally brought to the table. Sometimes leadership doesn't set the tone to look at the humanity before we look at the party, or before we look at all of our different interests. Oh, I come in as a farmer, as a business owner, as a teacher. I come in as a human first, right? A child of God, someone who was brought here for a purpose and want to do everything possible to live out that purpose and to not just survive, but thrive in our state, right? I think that's the root of a part of our fight, a part of what makes that workplace so dysfunctional. And, I think that going back to redistricting, even outside of the Capitol building and politics, the thing that for many folks on this meeting, leadership matters. Setting the tone for, not just dragging feet in there and saying, I guess we have to be more diverse. So we'll have a few more people that may not look like us or come from our backgrounds, but just know we just have to be more diverse. Leadership in setting the tone, making sure that it's authentic, and providing not only the intentionality behind making an inclusive work environment, but also the resources, right? The resources to do the work with fidelity, I think, is really important. It is a hope that, the redistricting process will make a more fair and inclusive and representative democracy. But we also heard that argument when we talked about term limits and how this was supposed to be the secret sauce to get younger people, more people of color, more women in the door. And while some will argue we have, made some strides in making our democracy a little more diverse, it's also created some pretty dysfunctional government for many folks. And so, I think that a workplace like the Capitol, Reverend Jones, that humanity is just right there, right? Because again, those diverse perspectives that we all come with and we lead with, and sometimes we lead with our party, that has created such a dysfunctional work environment. And so when I present a bill idea, such as banning discrimination in the workplace on the basis of hair, right, which is a bill that I've introduced and I plan on introducing again, people will see that and will not see the humanity behind that type of bill. They won't see that every time in my life I've had to chemically straighten my hair in order to fit the office culture. It is not only an economic impact on how I view myself and how I'm able to provide for myself and my family. It also impacts my health. The fact that now in my stage in life, I cannot put those chemicals on my hair because it has long lasting health outcomes that, I want to live a long life. And I shouldn't have to choose between how I wear my hair and whether I live or whether I'm able to provide for myself. And so I think that coming at it from that perspective and not from the stakeholders, the lobbyists, the political parties, but seeing me as a human being first, I think that is where we all, need to go. And I know that is hard, whether it's, from the corporate perspective or the political perspective, but I think it's the only way that we get there, that proverbial there that we're trying to get to.
Oh, that's helpful background. We did have one audience question on this topic before we move on. And really that's what can be done to encourage real and honest and valuable participation and input from residents who will otherwise be overlooked as part of the redistricting commission.
I think the same way we always do it, which is intentionally reaching out and making sure that people from Black and Brown communities, marginalized communities, are actually being ambassadors and reaching out intentionally to folks to share their stories, to be involved in the process. I can put in the website, but they're listening, they're trying to collect testimony from different communities. But the folks who are spreading that message need to look like the communities that they're trying to get the messages from, right? So I can put that in the chat about how folks can actually get involved, but it's going to take grassroots individuals, folks who are already connected to the community, to actually reach those communities that are often unheard in these processes.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Let's move to the case for the business case for diversity. Reverend Jones, obviously, this is a lot of your work is focused in this area. Can you highlight for the audience, the impact of diversity on business growth, even over the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure. I think that I just actually in terms of providing some context, I just stepped away from a role of served as president and CEO of the Urban League of West Michigan. So for about 10 years, that was the space and the place that I occupied, and that work was with an organization that was a historical civil rights organization whose very mission was to really enhance the economic outcomes of African Americans primarily, as well as others in community. And so, I've long recognized the benefit of organizations that organizations receive when they make a very conscious and intentional effort to diversify their workforce and the myriad benefits that come from that. And I think that probably one of the first things that I want to speak to is in all of this. Whenever we talk about the idea of a diverse workforce, we have to understand that a lot of it, if not most of it, begins with leadership. Okay, so there could be an HR director who recognizes the inherent value, sees the potential that it could bring. But if those in leadership, right, the president and above, don't see it as something that has real value or that can enhance the bottom line, then it's just going to be, I think, ultimately an exercise of futility, right? This ongoing effort to just say we checked a box. We were able to get this thing done. We created affinity groups. We were able to recognize Juneteenth. We did a bang up job on MLK. We were off the chain for the month of February for Black History Month, and the list goes on and on. But I want to suggest that it comes down to quite often leadership. And when I talk about leadership, it's the founders of the organization. If the founders of the organization did not prioritize or emphasize the absolute value of a diverse and inclusive workforce in the original organizational DNA, okay, then I want to suggest it would be especially difficult to develop a preference for diversity and inclusion later on, okay? So I want to suggest that that's probably the case for most companies, right? So if you look at some of the more established businesses, I don't know of many founders of organizations who, as they were bringing their company together, said, you know what, we have to make diversity a priority, right? Because we're talking about organizations in our respective cities and throughout the state of Michigan that quite often came together decades ago, some even, beyond a century, right? And that just was not a top of mind for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And so the question becomes, how do we change the DNA of an organization after it has existed, after it has existed as is since its inception? And so I'm not a science guy for everybody who's out there who's listening, but DNA is a dynamic and adaptable molecule. As such, I'm going to use this word first time ever, the nucleotide sequences found within it are subject to change as a result of a phenomenon called mutation. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is to better understand the varying effects of mutation, we first have to understand what mutation is, right? And a mutation is a change that occurs in our DNA sequence, either due to mistakes when the DNA is copied or as the result of environmental factors. And I want to suggest the environmental factor is a rapidly changing demographic, okay? A rapidly changing customer base. And so I also want to go so far as to say that any company these days that cannot find it in their mission or in their reason for being to commit to workforce diversity, I want to suggest that they should not really expect any opportunity for significant growth. They probably want to get used to where they are, or perhaps experiencing something below that, because the organizations that are going to grow and are going to prosper are the ones who are going to recognize the opportunity before them, but also recognizing that not only is it an opportunity in terms of business growth, finding the best talent, having, benefiting from the innovation that comes from a diverse workforce. But, most importantly, they're going to be best positioned to take full advantage of, again, the change that's at play right now in our country. And so it literally comes down to either you snooze or you lose. It's just that simple. And I think that there are obviously a number of ways in which organizations can go in terms of creating a more diverse workforce, but it has to be a very clear understanding that it is a lift. It's a lift that requires muscle. It's a lift that requires commitment. It's a lift that requires intentionality. But if you are anything like myself, and I'm sure a lot of folks who are listening to this, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And so that's the question that a business has to ask. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And I want to suggest that workforce diversity, and that's the business case for diversity, is if a business diversity makes dollars. And so if it makes dollars, it makes sense.
We had an audience question that is interesting to me. It's in the sense that West Michigan has a lot of family-owned businesses, a lot of closely held businesses that are owned by people that are very conservative, politically and with respect to a lot of these issues. And so the question is, obviously, you as a DE&I consultant, or me as their counsel, can have a pretty direct conversation with a lot of these business owners, just based on the relationships we have with them and kind of the level that we'd be discussing. What about the quote unquote regular worker bees who really value diversity and see the benefit of this? How can they engage with those business owners in a way that helps further their understanding of the benefits that you're talking about?
It's a good reminder for all of us that when we think of a company or organization, people make up companies, people make up organizations, and they warrant the developmental opportunities to reflect on the sources of their beliefs, their assumption about others, and their individual roles in supporting the structures, no matter how unintended or how subconscious, that keep women and people of color in particular held back in the organization they work for. Only then will efforts be able to succeed. You have to start there. That when we think about Apple, we think about all the wonderful products that are made by Apple, and perhaps we think about Tim Cook, right? Who's the head of the organization? Yeah, man. Apple consists of the company consists of people, right? And so when it comes to the actual change and the pressure that can be applied, it really is the individual, that worker who is there day in, day out, and their ability to have conversations, not just amongst each other, but it rapidly becomes an opportunity to take what I would say is good pressure to apply to those in power, to remind them of, hey, this is why I'm here, and this is what's going to keep me here. Because we all know that right now, as the old saying goes, good help is hard to find. And so you want to hold on to what you have as an employer. If you value what that employee brings, then you're going to lend your ear to what that employee has to say. And so whether we know it or not, the employee really does hold significant power. Oh, I would even go so far as to say as much power, if not more, than the shareholder.
That's helpful background. And the other thing that we look at internally is kind of this concept of retention, and how do you retain the top talent? Hiring the top talent is often easier than retaining them. And so a big part of, for us having these discussions is to kind of create an open workforce where people want to be. And so how do you convince an employer to see the benefit of that, Dr. Baker, even at the employee level and the talent level beyond just the customers?
Yeah, I think it's a great question that it certainly is being asked now, right? When we hear the importance of leadership, right? These things, you have to set the tone at the top, but the top is not listening in a lot of spaces. And one, I think I would challenge some of the notion that they don't get it. Some folks get it and they just don't want to commit to it. So we have to, think about what the approach is there. There is another side of this when you think about kind of the everyday employee, the worker bees, I call it, the people who are in the trenches doing this work on a daily basis, having to spend the time and energy to convince leadership that this matters. There are some very specific strategies, right? When we look at bringing in data and numbers and figures and saying this is how it would positively impact, right? That's one approach. The other approach is, education and awareness, amplifying the voices of the people around you. When you have a platform or have an opportunity to share your experiences, taking advantage of that time to say, here's how this is impacting us, whether you're considered a liaison, a manager, a leader in whatever way you are. So, I use it. I've spent a significant amount of time within these first couple months working within the athletics department, understanding and identifying that I have a platform on our senior staff that others within my organization and within our department have not historically had. That doesn't mean that they haven't listened or they haven't had an opportunity to share, but there are some who have not had a seat at this table to engage in these conversations. So I think, finding allies in the workspace, finding those influencers, finding those individuals who are in rooms at the table, have opportunities to have these conversations with leadership are other ways that you can kind of tangibly have your voice and your message heard. That being said, there is a responsibility on leadership. And I wrote something down while Reverend Jones was talking about how we're playing catch up, right? Most of our institutions have been rooted in racism, systemic oppression. There's no question. So we are playing catch up. But what we've seen and those who are doing this work, we're playing catch up using performative actions. So yes, we go hard during Black History Month, MLK Day, we pull out the best quote we can and create this beautiful graphic, but internally, we're not committed in the same way. And so our workforce is watching the performance, knowing that every day they're coming to work. And, an example of what Representative Anthony said, they can't even be their authentic selves. They're thinking about, can I do my hair this way today? Should I cover my tattoos? Should I not reveal this part of who I am? Meanwhile, we're using social media campaigns, we're launching affinity groups and all of these things when our policies, our procedures, our internal practices are not reflective of valuing diversity and giving the people within our organization the opportunity to even share who they are and inform us as leaders on what their perspectives are. So, there's a couple pieces there that I know I touched on and thinking about the retaining piece. I'll be quick because I know we have a lot more questions and time goes by fast, but in terms of retaining. So yes, can we get individuals in our spaces that represent diverse backgrounds? Sure. But when they come into that space, if we don't have an inclusive environment, we cannot retain them. And I'll circle back to hair, professionalism. If we have policies and our definitions of professionalism and our definitions of what we believe leadership should look like or what leadership should be, if we're holding on to those traditional concepts, when people come into our space, we're going to overlook them. We're not going to identify talent and see talent because of how it's packaged. Because we've been taught, and historically, the norm has been that leadership looks a certain way. Leadership speaks a certain way. Leadership shows up a certain way. So we're not investing in our staff, our employees to develop them because they don't look like what we've been taught they should look like. And again, sometimes that's physical and appearance, and other times it's what type of background they have. Did they come from a traditional background? Did they come from, something that we haven't seen before? And I think the sports industry in particular, being someone who, I'm an adjunct faculty member teaching sport management classes, and the students who take the classes come from all different areas across campus in terms of academic department. And who would have ever thought that, the kid who likes to play around in Photoshop and do graphics and animations could have a full-time job in the sports industry? Well, it's because those skill sets matter in our industry. And if we've always looked at, well, did you come the traditional route? Did you get the degree in this? Or did you have this experience? Well, we don't know if we can use you. Those are kind of small examples from my industry in particular of how we've thought outside the box, and we need to continue to do it. We have a lot of work to do in the sports industry, so I don't want to overlook that. But being creative and thinking about how to use the talent we have and the skill sets, leaders have to know and be vulnerable to say, I don't have this skill set. I need to go find it. And sometimes I have to look a lot farther than my immediate network. I have to form relationships and partnerships so that when I am looking for filling my staff or filling a position and then getting people there to retain them, I've done the work to find those individuals. And when they get here, I've invested the resources to allow them to thrive.
I think that's great feedback. We have some really interesting questions. You guys are provoking a lot of thought amongst the audience, which is great. And I want us to have time to hit on implicit bias strategies before we're done. But I want to hit on a couple of these questions that have come in. Representative Anthony, Judge Ackert asked, considering the justice system, what do we see as critical areas that need to be addressed regarding availability of legal resources for minority-owned and women-owned businesses, and in general, just access and fairness to the justice system?
Why do you give me the hard questions? That's a big question. Well, one, I wanted just to bounce off a little bit about what Dr. Baker was saying about how our systems are inherently biased and how we need to look beyond what we've normally done, right? In my time as a county commissioner, it was banning the box, right? Making sure that we weren't just excluding people based on our preconceived notions of what a manager, what a leader, what an employee could look like, and opening up opportunities for folks in ways that we just need to, right? And that is, again, a part of the business case of diversity, is you're bringing in people, the right people who may not have the degree or credential or come from the family or have the network, but you're getting the best, right? And I think that that is a retooling, right? I come from the college access field, right? I am a champion of post-secondary education and getting as many degrees as possible. If you know Kanye West early, I want degrees upon degrees, right? But how do we retool our thinking? Because oftentimes those are used as barriers and litmus tests to keep our circles in our workplaces small and not diverse, right? And that's just not where we need to be right now. The other thing that thinking outside the box, the other thing that I want to lift up, and I want to make sure that this is coming off in the spirit that it's intended, is, leadership matters, and doing this for the right reasons, whether it's the business case, the financial case. But I also think that we had an awakening in 2020. We have seen these systems flip upside down. Every crack that we knew was there, we shined a light on it. The microscope is open. So this is an opportunity for folks to get it right. But it is also a warning for folks who don't, right? Employees, stakeholders, investors are on notice at this moment, right? People are no longer going to stand by while boards are 100% white and male, while partners at law firms and at organizations have looked the same way, and the halls are full of headshots of folks that do not reflect the current diversity of our state or community, right? It is time out. You will be called out. It will be a public embarrassment. Stakeholders will start to disinvest. It is now a good time while the world is reckoning to get your house in order, because, we deserve better in this moment, right? And the financial case, the emotional case, all of the cases, it lines up right now. We have an opportunity right now to get this right. And the other thing I will say is there is again, going back to this humanity, I could tell you're a preacher, right? I know that that's a preacher. There was a question earlier about the toll that this has on the mental health and the emotional health of your employees. And I am of the belief that when you are called upon as a leader in an organization, you do care about the people that make up the company, right? And it cannot be underscored how deflating, how much of a slap in the face it is to see those perfectly curated Black Lives Matter statements, and you are not given the tools and resources to actually climb the ranks of your organization. A CEO that talks the talk, but then will not walk the walk in the hallway, will not acknowledge you and your existence and humanity, can be the most deflating, most unempowering thing that a person of color in an organization can experience. I've seen it. I've been there. If you do not think it's happening in the halls of your organization, I challenge you to approach your Black and brown stakeholders and employees. And if they are transparent, they will tell you about those traumatic experiences that are happening. And so I think that, this is a moment that we cannot let go by. The media is always going to move on, right? There's always going to be something else that will suck the air out of our boardrooms and our communities. But this is a moment that we have to do this real work in whatever sector we're coming from. And I know I didn't quite hit on the judge's question, but I think that just needed to be said. And, in terms of like the actual available resources for minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, et cetera, these are decisions, right? There are plenty of resources out there, but the barriers that are intentionally put there that lock folks out of those resources just need to be dismantled, right? Again, all of these systems were created to leave Black and brown folks out, to leave women out. So there has to be intentionality to actually open those resources up. And it's going to take, again, intentionality to get it done.
No, we agree. We couldn't agree with that answer more. And that's obviously Project Give Back is designed to attempt to provide and lower those barriers and provide those resources.
And thank you for doing that. That is a model that I hope others follow suit across the state.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be our hope. And obviously no one wants me going into court for them, but we certainly have a lot of people here that are happy to invest that time and support those people. Well, we have a strict 1 hour time limit here, so we are going to wrap up now. But I cannot appreciate both all three of the panelists, but everybody that took an hour out of their day to focus on these issues. One of the questions that we've gotten a lot in various forms is where are there more resources? What can we do internally? As a threshold matter, I'd encourage everybody to talk to Reverend Jones. I mean, he does this work day in and day out, and has been a very helpful resource to Miller Johnson and would be to anybody on this webinar that wants to effectively tackle these issues in a way that grows their business and quite frankly improves our community. I think that's one of the things that we've learned the most, is that when we're looking at things like retention, we can do everything we want to do, but if we don't have communities that everybody wants to live in and can thrive in, it doesn't matter. So again, thank you all for your time today. Any further questions, feel free to reach out to the firm and we'll follow up, and we'd hope to have similar discussions like this in the future. Thank you very much.